Good evening and welcome to City Hall. I have 5:30, so we will call this meeting to order. Mrs. Powell, roll call, please.
Branch,
Here.
Bray, Carroll, Graham,
Present.
Henry,
Here.
Hussey,
Here.
Mahalovich, Prather,
Here.
Schulte,
Here.
Scrivener.
Here.
Thank you. The purpose of tonight's meeting is our Budget Committee meeting to begin budget discussions for the 2013-2014 budget. In front of you is an amended agenda. I have asked the mayor to give an expanded description of the his proposed budget, and so we have realigned under item 3, A through G, to fit his notes and his presentation when it comes to that. So I would accept a motion to approve the amended agenda.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. We have adopted the amended budget, or the amended agenda. I'm sorry.
And thank you.
I'm anxious. We're anxious to go. Before I forget, our next budget meeting, and the plan tonight is to go till 7 o'clock. At 7 o'clock or close to that time, where we're at a good stopping point in the agenda, we will adjourn for the evening, and then we'll pick it up at our next scheduled budget meeting, which is Thursday, August the 8th, from 5:30 to 7 here in the council chambers. For the public, I would also like to announce that on Monday, August 19th at 6 p.m., which is a regular city council meeting, we will have the hearing on the budget, and at that time, the public will have an opportunity to voice any thoughts that they may have about the budget. So that is Monday, August the 19th at 6 p.m. With that, item number 2, discussion of revenue projections. Mr. Betts.
Excellent. For the council, in your iPad, I sent you some links, and I had a chance to get to some of you, but not all of you, for how we're going to handle the parking lot and revenue projections this year. But the same thing that is on the screen, you also have a copy of it that you can view from the link on your iPad, and it will give you the ability to where you don't have to turn around and look and stuff. And if there's a little refresh button that as we make changes or as you approve things, you can do a refresh on your screen, and you can see the changes that happen inside of the document. But just a real quick overview of the revenue projections. As you all are aware, the revenue projections are lower than what they were for the FY13, as we like to refer to it, the 2.0 budget, the revised FY13 budget. There are a couple of reasons for that. One is the way that we handle grants, and we began handling grants a little bit differently in FY13, and so this budget really reflects that. We get in several $1 million worth of grants each year, so it might appear that our budget's really $31 or $32 million, but until we know for sure that we're going to receive those grants and we're going to put that grant money to work, we do not put it in the budget. So we're not putting the revenue in there, nor are we putting the expenditures into the budget. And we've developed some new procedures that we brought to the council about a month ago, to where as we do go out for new grant revenue, we'll bring that to you, let you know that it's happening. Then we'll add that as revenue to the budget. We'll also add the expenditure, so the council is fully aware of any grant type of things that happen there. So that is one of the major changes as to why our projections for FY14 are a little bit lower than FY13. Another area is we did lower some projected areas, and we were very conservative whenever the city administrator put together his budget, and in talking with the mayor, he felt the same way. Is we wanted to not have the same events that we had happen in FY13, so we tried to keep our revenue projections on the more conservative side. What we have on the board is our categories, and what you have on your screen are the lump sum categories. Obviously, in the budget book, there are about 3 pages, line item by line item, of different ones that roll up into sales tax and motor vehicle. sales tax, other taxes, those types of things. The big categories that we have in our budget, as most of you are aware, is that sales tax probably accounts for about a third of the general fund revenue projections, and we left that flat for the year. We did not expand upon that. The other areas that are pretty big are utility tax, which we did go down some on utility tax, and that's due to the cell phone taxes that we bring in. We wanted to try to keep that in check. And one of the things we noticed is that the trend that we are seeing is that cell phone taxes, and cell phone taxes falls under the franchise and utility tax line item. One of the trends we're seeing is that's coming in a little bit lower than what we, had anticipated and hoped for, and it's something that we brought down in the FY13 2.0, and it's something we felt we needed to bring down in FY14 just to kind of meet those projections. And the other big area, or the major area, is in property taxes. And with property taxes, we left those flat for the year. We did inquire of the county as to what they felt, and they felt that we were kind of in the same regards. We were probably not going to go up much, maybe even a chance of going down, but they were unsure, but they didn't think that we should raise them. So we kind of felt that leaving them at a flat rate was the best case scenario. So when we did our revenue projections, those are kind of some of the things that we did. And overall, when we were developing the revenue, we did a lot of trend analysis. You'll see on your spreadsheet there that we give you the 5-year average is the first thing you'll see there. We also gave the 3-year average. We looked at all 5 years of the actuals that we had, and then we looked at the current year, kind of how things were moving forward, and those types of things. And so in some cases we're below the 5-year average, but that's because, and cell phone would be an example of that. That's because in the cell phone we had audit money and several $1 million worth of audit money. Well, we're not getting that same kind of audit money coming in now, so we had to lower our projections there. And so, and that's what we did. We looked at the current year, maybe last year, and said, well, yeah, the 5-year average might have been a certain number, but we need to be below that. And there are other areas where we said, hey, the 5-year average might be this number, but we're seeing an increase in that area, so we kind of bumped it up a little bit. But in all cases, we kind of tended to lean towards the conservative side, just to make sure that, again, where we didn't find ourselves back in the FY13 scenario that we had there. So that's kind of a high level of how we came up with the numbers for the city administrator's budget. I don't know if Nathan would like to add anything more to that. So,
well, just that if you look in your budget book, actually it's page 1, we have a pie chart that kind of shows the revenues. And the thing I would point out is that between property tax, utility taxes, and sales taxes, that's about 70% of the total budget. And there's a lot of other different things you can kind of look at, but none of those individually is more than 4%. And most of them, you can spend a lot of time wondering about whether those is going to go up or down, but they don't really make a lot of difference. So you keep your eye on the big picture, which is the big 3: property taxes, utility taxes, and sales taxes.
Thank you. Mayor, any additional comments that you would like to make with regard to revenue?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Set out early this year, probably started in maybe February or March, talking to what I would call a economic task force, so to speak. Interviewed roughly over 100 different people, and all partners within our community, people with the state, people with the county of Cole, our local construction market. Really tried to look at items that would drive sales tax or property tax, or just kind of show us overall trends. I won't go through all the different industries that I did talk about, but obviously what I really tried to do is try to get a feel from our local citizens and our businesses on which way they thought our economy was heading. And what I got from that was really what I would call positive growth in the future. I think we're very blessed to have a JCMG, Cap Region, and St. Mary's, and all the huge economic development things that they're doing now as drivers within our community. We know we have the world's largest retailer coming to our community in the next year. All of these, along with possible infrastructure redesigns and remodels, with our state capitol and hopefully a new building with the state, possibly at the Missouri State Penitentiary site. All of this, I think, will give us a stronger economy as we go over the next 17 to 18 months. And with that, I think you could probably take the dials and maybe try to tweak them slightly higher. But after this, I feel positive about the future. But I think it'd be better to go with what we have here and use the money as we see it and actually when we get it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mayor. What I'd like to do is work our way down through the list of 10 items or so. If the council has any questions of staff or the mayor that they would like to ask, do so at that time. If I hear no objections or motions to change the number, then we'll proceed to the next line item. And then move our way down through the revenue budget. Okay? Sales tax. Mayor's budget for 2014 proposed is $9,700,000. Questions or discussion on sales tax revenue? Mr. Henry.
Question for Mr. Mayor. This is actually, this actually proposed for sales tax was before our governor came out with his announcement, his possible announcement about state layoffs, correct?
And I appreciate you bringing that up, Councilman Henry. At the same time, I think we have enough positive growth within our community that I think leaving these numbers where they're at this time, we should be okay. However, I think if we get to September, I can't remember the exact date, the 11th or 13th of that veto deadline, and if we need to make more changes down the road, I think we can.
Additional questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. Motor vehicle sales tax. Proposed budget, $430,000. Comments, questions on motor vehicle sales tax? Mr. Scrivener?
I'm sure the number's there somewhere, but rather than try to dig it out, maybe somebody knows what it is. Where are we trending now? Where do we think we're going to end up on that line item for this year?
Yeah, I think for I think for this year we're certain. I think we're in line to meet the 430 that we have for next year. And since they also passed the new law to where if you buy a vehicle from an individual, you have to pay the local sales tax, those types of things. That also is something that helps us feel a little bit better about this number as well.
So we really don't have to show an increase in 13 or in 14 over 13 in order to hit that number.
Correct.
Okay.
Other questions, comments on motor vehicle sales tax? Seeing none, we'll move on to other taxes. Proposed budget, $1,220,000. And Mr. Betts, why don't you give us a overview of what is in other taxes, please?
Yes, in other taxes, what you see there is you see the we have the gasoline tax and the cigarette tax are the two that we have there. And this is we did do a slight decrease for this particular line item, and it was for the cigarette tax. One of the things that we're kind of seeing that we were seeing trending at the time was that the cigarette tax was kind of trending down a little bit. So we lowered it just I think by $27,000 is what we lowered it over the FY13 budget. Otherwise, gasoline tax remained the same.
Questions on other tax? Okay, move on. Franchise and utility tax. Proposed budget revenue $7,170,000. Questions? Mr. Scrivener.
It's my understanding that there was within this past week a Board of Adjustment meeting whereby Ameren UE asked for an adjustment on their property taxes, and I was curious if that. Yeah, it's my understanding they got some of what they asked for. Is that going to affect this number?
It will affect our numbers, but not this number. That would affect the property tax number is where that shows up. They had got an adjustment on the personal property side of things, but not on the real estate side of things, which should be less of an impact than what they were originally projecting. But it still will overall reduce. Well, you have to look, I guess, at what other things are offsetting that, but it certainly will have an impact on property tax.
And are we planning to make any adjustment to that number? Do we know how much of an adjustment should be made yet, or have we had a chance to calculate that?
We have not had a chance to calculate that, and you really have to kind of see what all the other adjustments come out to be to
It
to
may
know.
offset.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? I had one, Mr. Betts, on telephone cell utility audit. It looks like we're in the third year. What's the term on that? How much longer is the?
Just to make sure, you're referring to the line item that says telephone cell utility dash audit. Basically, we've been doing audits for several years, but the reason we left money in there is because each year we have different cell or telephone companies that we can go out and audit. Next year we'll have additional companies that we can audit. And what we've found historically is that there'll be some that we'll be able to collect some funds on, and the 110,000 is the number we feel comfortable with.
Okay, so that's not a payback of a previous audit. That's revenue generated from potentially new audits.
Correct. That's correct.
In the past, that had been included in our overall revenue for that that line, electrical, cell phone, whatever it was. And that was part of the problem that was distorting our budget so much. So we broke it out separately so that that will not be a problem in the future.
Thank you. Any other questions on franchise and utility tax? Mr. Scrivener?
Again, I may be just overlooking it, but you said you broke it out, but I'm not seeing a line item here. Where is it? I'm probably just overlooking it.
If you're looking at the numbers on the left-hand column, Mr. Scrivener, item number 52 is telephone, cell phone utility tax. Only thing that is the receipt taxes that we will receive. The very next line item down is 410053, and that's just for doing audits.
Okay, are you talking about on here or on here?
In here.
Okay, I'm looking at this page. I'm on the wrong page.
Page
Okay.
4, yes, sir.
Sorry about that. That's
No
where I
problem.
was making my notes from earlier. Okay,
Got
thank
it.
you. Gotcha. I thought I'd seen that in there before.
Additional questions?
Nope.
Mr. Graham?
Mr. Betts, is this a new tax or something?
It's not a new tax. What we found, and I don't recall, Mr. Nicholas probably knows better than me, but several years ago we brought on a city auditor, and they began to audit the telephone and cell phone companies, and what we found is they were underpaying their collections for the taxes that they were charging. And this in the past has gotten settlements of over $1 million, but we've audited each of the phone companies, and now we're to kind of just every couple of years we go back and audit them, but we don't have as much to collect because they make corrections and types of things, so they're not underpaying as much as they have historically. So it's not a new tax, it's just us getting the funds that they've collected already.
So prior to 2013, we were not doing an audit? Is that how I'm supposed to read this or no?
Prior to 2013, we were doing the audit, but what was happening was whenever we got in the audit funds, we just put it into the line item that would have been just a regular utility line item, and that caused a lot of confusion. So what we tried to do was say, hey, we break out the audit money versus the taxes that were paid kind of money there.
Thank you.
If you look in your books, you'll see that the original line, the historical line, stops at 2012. If you look at, for instance, I'm looking at line 50, telephone utility license tax, and then in 2013 you can see we broke it down differently and the new line starts. So it's just a change in the auditing. It looks as if one thing ended and the other one just suddenly began, but really it's just we switched the lines.
On that,
Mr. Hussey?
same point, for the 13 budget, we've got a projection of 2.825 million, but we're thinking 2.5 in the future. And I guess, you know, being the prognosticator here, are we going to hit the 2.825 million this year? And if so, why do we think we'll see a $325,000 decrease in that tax line item?
Great question, and to answer your question is we don't think we're going to hit that item this year, but there are other areas within that grouping within the franchise and utility tax where we believe we're going to go up. For instance, the electric tax we believe we're going to go up. We believe we're also going to go up on the gas utility or tax there. We believe we're going to go up some there. So even though we're going to fall short in 13, we believe some other areas we're going to be above and beyond the shortage there. So that's hence why we lowered it for 14. So,
and 325 would be the amount you think it should be lowered, or are we being very conservative there? That seems like a significant drop on a projection, but at the same time, if you think we're going to come in less this year, I'm just curious if you know how much less off the budget line item.
At our current pace, whenever I did the last trend analysis, which was about a month ago, I figured this year we were going to come in somewhere between the 2.4 and 2.5 million dollar number. So.
Other questions, Mr. Scrivener?
I don't know if it's an appropriate question for tonight or not, but it is a question I think we need to be thinking about. If I just heard you right, you said your trend projection is at about 2.5 at the best.
Yes.
Yes. So that means for this year we could be 325 short. We need to be looking for some more adjustments for this year.
Actually, in the thing, you know, it's when you get down to this level, what I've found is that on the electric utility tax, I actually think we're going to come in at 3.6 this year.
Okay.
So just, I mean, it kind of offsets it.
So
And
you're
maybe
saying
even
a different line item is offsetting
right in that
this.
same grouping, I believe they're going to offset
Okay.
one another.
All right.
And I believe we didn't project the electric to go up that much for 14 because electric is one of those variable things. I mean, it you know, if
Percentage.
it's, and it depends on if we have a mild winter or if it's, you know, a really hot summer. All those types of things affect it. So we did raise it slightly for 14, but we didn't want to go gangbusters there and raise it too high for 14. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? I guess I'm personally not sure that we shouldn't treat the audit revenue like we do grants. And once received, then we put it in, but we can leave that for now. So other questions about utility tax? Okay, next is property tax, 5,209,000. Comments or questions? No questions? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to intergovernmental grants. Budget $918,463. Questions? Mr. Prather.
Is there any way we can get a number? There is quite a bit of difference between you know, this projection versus 2012 actuals, and I know a lot of it has to do with not including all the grants. Could I find out what that number is so we can kind of have something to, you know, kind of measure by?
Just to make sure I understand what you're asking for, are you just wanting us to tell you, like in FY12, what grant money we had come in and where we spent it? I mean, you kind of want a breakdown of that, or?
Well, I guess I was trying to make clear between the two numbers, because we're going from let me see, 2012, 3.1 million down to 918,000, and I just want to explain how I know we should be there, but I need to know, kind of explain as to why we're there.
Okay. I can give a little bit of an explanation, and then if there's further information you need, we can get that to you as well. But basically, what happens with the grants is that the money comes, the funding comes in as the year progresses, and so when we bring that funding in, we'll add the revenue here to this line item, and we'll also offset the expenses in the budget. So what we did for 14 was we knew that there were a few grants that were going to come in. So there's about $348,000 worth of federal grants, and those basically go to CDBG and to the MPO is where that funding goes. So we know that those are going to come in. So we went ahead and put the revenue in, and we also put the offsetting expense in the budget to keep that so that those two wash one another out. And so that's probably where a majority of the change will be, is in the federal grants line item. There's some local grant information that'll be there. Like there's $20,000 we have in the budget. And most of that, there's a little bit of MPO local grant money, and then there's some money that the county and Allied Waste give us for recycling. That gets us to our $20,000 there in local grants, and then the road and bridge tax is an agreement that we have with the county for $550,000. So we left that the same as has been in the past historically. So it stayed at 550. So the major changes in federal grants, and so we can give you in 12 if we just don't know that those grants are going to come in, so we didn't want to put them in the budget until we knew for sure. In the past, we kind of took the previous years, but we maybe didn't offset the expenses in our budget, and so you saw this big revenue line item, but maybe not, and so that kind of could have caused us some problems in our budgeting in FY13 as well. So we were trying to eliminate that and say if we don't have an expense line item for that grant, we will not have a revenue line item, that way that it's a true number. So yep.
Mr. Scrivener?
So basically what you're saying, Bill, is that over the course of the year, if the normal course of events that we receive approximately another $1.5 million or so in grants over the course of that year, that by the end of the year our budget will not reflect 28 and some million, it'll reflect almost 30 million, which will be historically back in line with where it won't be quite as much as it was at the peak, but it will be more in line with the historical numbers, because we're waiting to show that money after we've actually received it, as opposed to anticipating that we're going to get it.
That's correct.
Okay.
But I think what Mr. Betts was also saying is the expenses will also be amended as we go along. And so at the end of the year, you will also have expenses that actually match up with the grant income, which
Any additional questions on intergovernmental grants? Okay.
Under that same item for intergovernmental, their contributions and overtime, I guess, reimbursement has 0 all the way across. Is there some reason why we're still carrying that, or are we expecting some monies to come in, or what?
I think for DARE we do expect monies to come in, but we're kind of handling them like grants. As we get the funding, we'll put them in, and we'll also offset. On the overtime reimbursement, it probably, I'm not sure what that was used for in the past, if it was a police-related line item or not, but we actually carry police stuff. Yeah, so we carry all of that now under a different line item at the bottom of the revenue, under the 10,300 area there for those revenues. So in the future, that line item or overtime reimbursement could go away if we don't anticipate using that. So you might not see that in your GL next year. So
Okay, thank you.
Additional questions? Okay, next is charges for services. Proposed revenue $1,479,559. And Mr. Betts, if you could give us an overview of what those charges for services categories are and how they're allocated, please.
sure. In charges for services, we have admin chargebacks, and what that is that's things like wastewater, parking, parks and recreation, some of what we call enterprise funds. They pay money into the general fund for things like finance, HR, city administrator, those types of things, IT, those types of things, and they're based on a percentage of the budget for the most part, as to their percentage of the overall budget, and then we charge them a fee for that particular deal. So that's what admin chargebacks are. Basically this year we kept it pretty well flat from last year because our budget hasn't changed a lot. Some other things that you'll see in there are things like fuel chargebacks, parts chargebacks, and labor chargebacks. One thing to note is on the fuel chargebacks, and that's probably why this line item is quite a bit lower than years past, is that we moved the fuel out to the departments. And so instead of handling all of the fuel inside of what we call the non-departmental fund, we move that back out to the departments. So police has a budget for fuel, fire has a budget for fuel, Public Works has a budget for fuel. And what that does, and what we felt that was going to do, is that's going to help us track it better, help the department directors that have that budget line item to know, what's going on with the fuel, and if we need, to go into fuel saving mode, to give them the ability to do some things and see what's going on there with the fuel. So that's where that the drop there from the years past has went down. The same with labor and parts. One thing we found there is that the labor and parts chargebacks are only the enterprise fund chargebacks. In the past, we're not real sure how the number was completely calculated because it was quite a bit higher than what we could come up with and calculate. But the labor and parts chargeback should not be general fund. So in a sense, the general fund should not be charging PD a chargeback fee because we don't. For any labor or parts, that their general fund, just like central maintenance is. So we had to lower that to where it's only transit and any of those enterprise funds to where they were paying the chargeback fees. So that overall is how the charges for service got lowered. The big part was the fuel, but then there were a few other areas like the labor and parts where we thought that the number should be quite a bit lower.
Mr. Scrivener?
With almost $500,000 in lowered revenue in the administration accounts, was there also a corresponding reduction in expenses? Were you not only accounting for revenue here, but also accounting for an expense here, as opposed to accounting for it in the departments?
That is true. So in the in the past, what it was is in the 10185 section of your budget, which we call non-departmental, there was a huge line item for fuel, and now that's a very small line item. So basically, what we plan to do is we're gonna when we order the fuel, we'll still order the fuel from one location and at one time to get the best value there. But what we'll do is at that time we'll do adjustments to each of those departments to charge them back. So we'll bring money 10185 will go into the negative, and then we'll go grab the money and then to go back out to the positive. So that'll happen.
Are you going to actually find yourself making fewer entries this way? I mean, I'm trying to run through this process in my mind, and it almost sounds like there were multiple entries for every one of these transactions because you were doing it within the departments and then doing it in the administration department as well. It just seems to me like it's been streamlined. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I don't know that I would say there's going to be fewer entries. But there'll probably be actually a few more. But I think we feel it'll give us a better accounting of what's going on, better picture, and it also helps the department directors as they're managing their departments, gives them a better picture of what's going on as well.
Okay.
Other questions? Mr. Graham?
So under that same note, so I guess we will get a chance to see the fuel charge under each department. That's where we'll see that line item at.
That's correct.
Okay. All right.
Anyone else? Okay, fees, licenses, and permits. Proposed budget $633,600. Questions or comments? Mr. Hussey?
I have a question, Mr. Betts, on the business line item there, business licenses. We're projecting 28 roughly thousand lower than the 13 budget, 55,000 lower than the 12 balance. I guess, why do we think we're going to come in short of what the 13 projection is, or are we anticipating kind of a flat business growth? It seemed like the trend on that one was slowly moving the right way with a spike in 12, and I don't know if we've thought things are kind of flatlining right now.
And that's what we did was we took and we saw that in FY11, and that's kind of back where we're on pace with is where we were in FY11 because we did see the spike in 12. So we're not seeing from our collections that we're going to probably reach the 13 goal. I think we felt we were more on pace with this 205, so we are going to be slightly short of that. There'll be some other areas again where I think we're going to meet it, but I think in 13 we felt like we needed to lower that a bit.
Quick follow-up, the building construction fees in 12, the 466, I'm assuming that may be related to the St. Mary's construction project? That's the
Correct.
spike. Okay.
Yes, sir.
I thought so.
I think, and Bill can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think also on in 12, the reason you're seeing a spike in business licenses is we did some substantial collections of auditing of people who didn't have business licenses and collected several years back of the business licenses they owed, and so you brought in $40,000 or $50,000 more than what you normally would have.
That is correct. I forgot about that.
Mr. Mihalovich, did you have a question? Nope, he got it. This side, any other questions? Mr. Scrivener.
Somebody mentioned building construction fees. Have we factored in the expected renovations at Capital Region? That's a pretty significant project. I don't know if we should get down to the point of considering every project, but that's a pretty big project, and I don't know if that'll happen in 14 or not. I think it may be begin in 14, won't it?
We do try and, if we see a big one like that coming, we try and factor that in, but we were assuming that would not be coming until 15.
Till 15, okay.
I have a question. This is probably more of an expense-related question, but the last item, non-refundable plans and specs, I'm sure there's an offsetting printing cost that goes along with that. And it's just $3,000, but has there been any discussion about going to online distribution of our purchase orders and plans and specifications in lieu of printing all of them?
Well, yeah, those kind of two different subjects: purchase orders and plans and specs. Yes, we are trying to move everything towards going online. Although something like plans and specs, you would likely get a lot of people who want hard copies of those, just because of the size. They don't tend to go on screens as well. But we are trying to move as much as possible onto digital.
The majority of the projects that we look at, owners are putting plans and specs online, and you're responsible to get your own prints made. And so, I mean, significant amount of money spent putting drawings together and specs. So we can talk about that more when we get to the expense side. But Mr. Scrivener, did you?
I was just going to make the same comment that it would seem to me that most builders probably have the equipment to print those plans and specs, and might very well prefer to print them themselves. If you might, as you said, we can talk about that more later, but that might be something to consider from a standpoint of saving money for us, and maybe in the long run saving it for them if they have the equipment to do it anyway.
Other questions under fees, licenses, and permits? Seeing none, we'll move on to fines and forfeitures. Proposed budget amount $1,009,980. Comments or questions? Mr. Scrivener?
In talking to Judge Walker when we were trying to, and Prosecutor Struemph, when we were trying to make our adjustments to our budget earlier this year, I know that they both had talked about the fact that they were handling a lot more cases, and I know they've been working to try to work out innovative ways to sentence people, and maybe that's going to affect the fines, but I certainly thought that the trend was up rather than down, so I was a little surprised to see us project less fines instead of more. maybe that was just a conservative way of budgeting, I don't know, but I was a little surprised to see that.
We looked at what they were actually bringing in this year, and our estimation was that they would not bring in as much as what they had expected this year.
Okay, so maybe they were a little ambitious in anticipating what they were going to get.
It seems that they started the year very well, and that it's kind of started to slow down as the year has gone by.
Well, I know Judge Walker had said they were trying to do some innovative things that maybe didn't always lead to fines, community service or what have you. So maybe that's affected that in some ways.
Probably to some degree. It's really difficult with any of these things. There's a lot of different variables that could affect it one way or another, and it's difficult to statistically say this is what the effect of that's going to be. So really what we just look at is we focus on the trends, and we although on a yearly basis they've been going up, it does seem like this year they kind of peaked and are maybe slowing down a little bit.
Thank you.
Other questions? Mr. Prather?
On parking fines, it looks as if it trended down from 2008 to 2011, and it looks like it's jumping up from 2012 to 2014, about 17,000 in fines. Is there an explanation as to how we anticipate getting that increase?
I think on that one we looked at a long-term average because it's one of those that jumps up and down on a year-to-year basis, and so sometimes what we have to do is just kind of look at what a longer-term average is to get a better number. That the trends are difficult to predict on some of them.
Mr. Scrivener?
One other question: what is jail recovery cost? I see we've cut that by a third. Is that we're trying to recover our cost for housing inmates at Cole County Jail, perhaps?
In the old days, when we sent someone to jail, we got billed for their time in jail, and then we would attempt to recover that from them, the prisoner, when he came back to municipal court. Now we get, as part of the deal to give them the land for the jail, we get free jail spaces, and so we really do a lot less of that. There's still sometimes we have to recover certain costs, but it's a lot less than whatever we used to have to do.
Just as a reminder to the council as well, because I had forgotten since we started this discussion, hit your refresh button and all of your numbers will populate under the proposed council budget section. I had a question on bank card charges. There's a negative $13,000 of revenue. I'm assuming that's processing fees on tickets that are paid. Can we not charge that processing fee in addition to the ticketed amount to recover that cost? I mean, in essence, in my mind, it's a reduction of the fee of the fine.
It's just so you know, it's not just for fines. It's for utility bills, other things that we allow folks to do online, and when they come in to pay credit card with their credit card and those types of things, there's a fee that we're charged. And what we're seeing, the reason that actually has gone up a little bit, is we're seeing that more and more folks are using the online services that we're providing to them. So we could certainly charge a fee, but we kind of want to. I think the city decided at some point along the way that offering the citizens that convenience, and it kept folks from having to come to City Hall and those types of things, and us from touching a piece of paper if they did it electronically. So we kind of felt like it offset each other.
I would agree with that. Since it was under the fines and forfeiture section, I assumed it was all for that, but maybe we ought to move that portion of it up under the utility section, or show it as an expense.
I think that's what me and Sheila have debated that, to be honest with you, where it really belongs. But this is where it was. It might be something that we do need to move in the future, though. So.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions? Okay, move on to other operating revenue. Budget revenue amount of $762,407. Mr. Betts, if you'd give us an overview of that section, please.
basically there's a lot of different items that fall under the other operating revenue. From things like donations for police canine, the animal shelter, to things like we get cafeteria refunds if our employees don't use all their cafeteria money. We have some agreements with Cole County for our Midmo GIS site, also for some IT work. There's just there's rent on cell towers and other sites around the city. So there's quite a few different line items. This number did change a little bit, and the reason for the change was when it came to animal shelter donations. We felt in the past the revenue was added in here. We felt that it was important, unless you knew you were going to get the animal shelter donations, not to add that revenue in. And I think in the past what they thought was we were building the shelter and we were regularly getting animal shelter donations. They could put it here and do some offsetting. We don't see nearly as much in animal shelter donations now as has been seen in the past. The other, there was a couple other areas. We also have an agreement with Cole County for 911 reimbursement. So if we change anything in the 911 budget, that revenue line item would also have to change. So this matches how the mayor has his budget. The revenue here matches exactly the percentage that the county pays us for 911. So that kind of is a brief overview of that.
Questions or comments under other operating revenues? Mr. Scribner?
It's a small item, but I guess I was a little curious about the interest income. It looks like in 2013 it's trending higher than, well, it is already higher than what was budgeted at 40. So we're proposing 65, which is more than a 50% increase. Is that just a recognition that maybe we under budgeted a little bit in 12?
It was, and I think what happened in 13 was initially we were coming in a little low there when we did FY13 2.0 budget. And what we've recognized is that we're probably even going to exceed the 65. Our fund balance probably has a little bit to do. Our fund balance is now set up, and we're getting sales. The different types of things. So we're starting to see that the 65 we think is a conservative number. It's actually one that probably could even be bumped up a little bit more if needed to be. I mean, we could leave it in the spirit of conservatism, but it's 65 we feel very comfortable with right now, unless something were to happen to the fund balance.
On the interest, that's actually our next line item. Finish up
okay,
under-
I'm sorry.
You're fine. You're fine.
Went below.
Mr. Mihalovich?
Yeah, this item has a 70% drop from last FY12. So about $500,000. I see explain again the rent on the cell tower. Why is that going down?
That is, I'm trying to find it. Give me 1 second here. I've noted. Okay.
Now, while you're formulating an answer, I'll
Yes.
also say this doesn't have any impact on the legislation. I know there's been some legislation that's passed that will impact future cell towers and possible city revenues, and that in part was one of my questions on overall impact to our revenues. Do we anticipate legislation that's been enacted or other things that could negatively impact our revenue? And so that question is still out there.
I think I can give you the answer to the cell phone, and then I'll let Mr. Hilpert answer the legal side of things there. We did some auditing of cell phone towers in the past, and that's why our revenue was a little bit higher. What we're seeing on the trend from FY13 to FY14 is 80,000 is more in line with where we probably need to be, because once we got the cell phone straightened out. And what happens, and I don't want to try to get too technical there on because I'm not sure I totally have all the technicality behind the cell phones, but we have an agreement with them on how many on the number of devices that they can put on that tower, and the more they put on there, the more the city can charge. And when we went back and audited them, we found that they had put more than they had reported to us, so we were able to go back and say, hey, you owe the city some additional funds, at which they paid us, which caused our revenue to go up for the actuals there that you're seeing. But now they kind of have a base of where we think 80,000 is probably a fair number. Now, as far as does the legislation affect things, I don't believe so, but I'll let Mr. Hilpert answer that question.
Yeah, that's right. All of our agreements have some form of revenue share, so we get whatever income. When they add a carrier, we get some more part of it. The legislation will probably prevent us from adding any new tower, or should expect any new revenue for the foreseeable future. They will not affect the contracts we currently have. So I don't think the legislation will affect what they've proposed as income.
Are there going to be any new cell towers built inside the city that you're aware of within the next foreseeable future?
We don't have any applications pending currently.
Okay.
Oh, actually, Britt says there is one. Oh, that's already taken into account. No other ones we're not aware of.
Follow up? You're good? Mr. Scrivener?
Hopefully this is on topic since we're talking about cell towers, but will we still have the ability to have zoning regulations and so forth with towers, or are we totally?
We have some limited zoning powers. That's kind of what we're left with.
Okay.
Any questions? I had a couple under miscellaneous in 2010 and 2012. There was significantly more money, 82,000 in 10 and 100,000 in 12. Do you recall what those were for, and I mean, what makes up the miscellaneous 24 that's being projected?
I'm looking to Sheila because she's probably looking to see what made up the 10 and the 12. I think the my answer to you for the 24 was probably just based on my answer for the 24 is probably just based on what we kind of saw as a trend, and we put a number there. I'm not sure that we're 100% sure as to what the 24 is, but what the other numbers are, why they were so high, I'm sure there's a reason, but I'm not sure as to what it is. It could have been a number of things because we put a whole bunch of stuff in miscellaneous. So,
And while she's looking that up, I'll ask you my other question. Under insurance claims, we're projecting $20,000. Do we know of a loss we're going to have, that we're going to have a claim, or how do we arrive at that?
yeah, we put a budget number in here. Every year the city's put a budget number of some sort in here, but insurance claims can be from us, having somebody driving a city vehicle and hitting another vehicle, and we have to pay. And we have a certain threshold that we have to pay it to before our insurance company takes account. And I can't remember how high that is. Is it 5,000?
5,000. 5,000 on vehicles.
5,000 on vehicles. So we have to.
I'll guarantee you we'll have that much in damages to reimburse ourselves.
But this is a revenue. It's not an expense.
Right, and it's
So
what happens there is that we initially pay it out, and then we get revenue. We'll get reimbursed back. So we certainly expect we'll be. If there's an expense line item in non-departmental, that'll be higher than this revenue line item. So what we'll see is a lot more go out, and then some funding come back for this particular deal. And there's no science. I'll be honest. There's no science behind it. It's just there's even like on the expense side, we budgeted something for both. We know both are going to happen. We budget more on the expense side than we do on the revenue side. In the past, it was the other way around. We budgeted more on the revenue side than we did the expense, but that has not held true. We believe it's the other way. So,
I was going to say, it's all money coming in is revenue, even if it's to reimburse you for money you've already paid.
I understand. Okay, good enough. Mr. Scrivener?
I'm curious, this label 481090 Cole County Sheriff - New World. What is that?
Some time ago, the council passed what we did was the sheriff uses New World Systems as their the same as the police department does for their public safety software, and we made an agreement with them that we would help offset that with some IT support up there. The goal was that the sheriff was considering moving to a different software package, which would have, in many instances, caused not only the IT department but our police department, our police officers more work, and so we were trying to avoid that, and we came up with an agreement with the county that to offer them some assistance, some professional assistance there.
So you're providing the service and the general fund's getting the income, right?
That would be correct.
Okay, thank you.
In the miscellaneous account, in 2012, there was some money that we got from Cole County for an emergency siren. That would go in as miscellaneous income for the general fund and then was paid for in turn out of the police department. And if I'm not mistaken, Bill, was there not a transaction also that had to do with aerial photography?
That is correct.
And it would have gone into
If
this account as well, I
GIS stuff,
think.
that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Other questions on other operating income? Mr. Hussey?
You may have said this, Mr. Betts. What is NSP rehab sales?
I can answer that.
Go ahead.
That is a federal government program, part of the American Recovery Act. We were given money to buy foreclosed properties from banks that they couldn't sell, and then in the end we would sell those properties, and the income from selling those properties would come in as income and actually it goes back into that program. But again, it's one of those, even though it's not really money we can use, it's money coming in, so it counts as income.
Other
I-
questions?
I don't remember what NSP stands for, but Janice probably knows. Neighborhood Stabilization Program.
Neighborhood Stabilization Program. It's a HUD program.
Thank you. Mr. Mihalovich?
Well, then the follow-up would be, do we have properties for sale?
Yes, we do.
And where's the revenue line item for that?
The property that we currently have, we do not believe we'll be able to sell. But I'm willing to talk.
Okay, other questions? If not, we'll move on to interest income. Budget of $65,000. Questions or comments on interest income? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to other non-operating revenue. Budgeted amount of $20,000. Mr. Betts?
Just briefly on this one, last year we had a budget of $297, and the reason for that was, if the council recalls, the sale for the water tower at the new Fire Station 3 site. So we had, I believe it was $277,000, if memory serves me. So we took that out of the budget because we're not anticipating selling any more pieces of property like that, assets like that. So the other $20,000 will be money that we'll get from our auction or those types of things as we go along throughout the year.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, operating transfers in $21,940. That appears to be part of the fees for the facilitator for the conference center. Is that correct?
No, actually, it's it does come from lodging tax, but it's the revenue. We get a percentage of for handling the lodging tax. The general fund also receives gets a certain percentage of that. So this is what we believe our estimation will be from that.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, seeing none, police grants. Mr. Betts?
And on the police grants, I just want to make sure what we did here is similar to how we handled all the other grants. If we were aware of a grant that we were going to get, we went ahead and put that in the budget, and we worked closely with Lauren Maddox and the police chief on this to make sure. We certainly do anticipate some additional police grants throughout the year, particularly for overtime. and those types of things. But we didn't put those into the budget until we got those and knew the exact amount. At the time in which we get those overtime grants, we will put those into the budget. We will also put additional overtime into the police department's budget that they can utilize. So otherwise, the only grant money that is in there is for the types of things. For instance, there's like $183,000 in there, and that's for school resource officers that the school district will pay to us. So we're aware of the funding that they'll give us. It's an agreement that we have in place. We know what our cost is. They pay 50% of that. So therefore, that's how we come up with that number. So,
Mr. Scrivener.
If I can get this to stay on. Mr. Chairman, I guess I jumped the gun a while ago, and I'm a little slow this time. I see that this carryover surplus is in the account that we were previously discussing, and I really wanted an explanation of why that number has disappeared. If you could, please.
sure. And what this is that was a transfer from the fund to balance, and what that incurred. And I wish I had all of the things here, but the council had approved a couple of transfers. One for the fire department, and I don't remember the exact number, so I don't want to say a number. 815. There you go. 815,000 makes up that. And then there were two other projects that the council had approved us to take money from fund balance and put into that account. But a majority of it was for the fire department improvements of 815,000.
That makes sense. Now I know what it is.
Any other questions? Mr. Graham.
Mr. Betts, I want to make sure that I got this right. Did you say that under school resource officer that the school system reimburses 50%? So we pay the other 50% salary of a school resource officer?
That's correct.
Okay.
And that's benefits and all of those types of things that are associated with the school resource officer.
And how many resource officers do we have in the school system? I guess that'd be a question for Chief.
Yeah, I'll let him answer.
We have a few more officers than 5 assigned to the schools, but alluding to that number, that designates 5 positions.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? That gets us to the end of the revenue. And based upon our discussions, there were no motions made to change the revenue projections. Is there any, I want to give the council another opportunity, is there any questions about any category within revenue? Mr. Mihalovich.
I had several questions that I'd posted. I don't know that that maybe they can be answered verbally, but one of the questions, and I did get some other information back that the mayor had asked that was helpful, but do we know of any pending laws or anything that's going to impact our revenue, that adversely impact our revenue in any way? Anything that we have accounted for or foresee?
We included in the budget all of those laws that we were aware of that we thought might have an impact. You sometimes don't know, though, what you don't know. So there certainly are things that could jump out, and sometimes it's not so much that there's a new law as a new interpretation of a law that can have an impact. Prevailing wage is a good example of that.
I'm not aware of anything that the governor passed into law that would have affected the budget or that I would have recommended to Bill or Nathan about.
I think recently been encouraged by the Missouri Municipal League to support the veto of this legislation that may very well impact our state workers in higher ed and other areas. I don't know that the impact, I think it's probably hard to determine, but I would go on to support that effort. I know I know that's not a part of the topic today, but it does have an impact to our revenue.
Any other questions on revenue? I had one, looking forward to 2015. Are there any revenues that we are anticipating for 14 that we're not anticipating for 15? And if so, what are those?
I think I wouldn't say there are revenues, but one of the things that we did when we balanced the budget was that the transit system actually had developed a fund balance over the last few years. And as everyone knows, the transit system gets a subsidy from the general fund, and so it should not be developing a fund balance. It should pay back that fund, any money they have left over, and give the subsidy back that the city had. So they had a fund balance of, I believe, nearly $400,000 or somewhere in that range. So what we did was, whenever we balanced the budget, one of the things we did was we lowered transit subsidy for the year clearly $300,000, not about. So we lowered their subsidy $300,000, and we took that from their fund balance. We did leave about $100,000 or thereabouts. Don't quote me on that exact number, but there was some money that we left there for some other items that may be coming up with the transit building in the coming years that Mr. Smith and Mr. Marash had informed us of when it came to the roof and some tuck pointing and some things like that there might be some expenses associated with that in the coming year. So we didn't want to spend all of the money that was there to get them to have no money in their fund balance in case one of those expenses came up. So in 2015, there will be $300,000 additional needed for the transit subsidy to be put back in. So I don't know if that's revenue, but it's certainly something I think it hints to the spirit of what you were asking about.
Mr. Graham.
And a question along that same line. So those monies are earmarked for that specific those specific projects, correct?
You talking about the fund balance that we left in there?
Transit.
It is. It's something that was brought up, and the money was basically what it was the general fund gives money to transit, and it used to be in times past that got swept back out and moved back to the general fund. For some reason, it hadn't happened over the last several years. So the money we left in their fund balance was for any special projects that may needed to happen down there at the transit building. The council could certainly say, hey, we want all that moved back to the general fund and be well within their rights. But we just felt like if one of these projects came up, they were going to be a pretty high dollar project, that we would have a place to find the money if something were to happen there.
Mr. Scrivener?
I just want to make sure that I understand the process. When you say you swept the account, essentially what the result of doing that is that you just have $300,000 that's been transferred that is now back into our fund balance, if you will, rather than transit's surplus.
The way we handled it, basically, I mean, you're right on the lines, but we just didn't give them as much in subsidy this year. We lowered their subsidy $300,000. So
they're going to spend out of their cash reserve as opposed to spending out of fresh money.
Correct. You've got it.
Okay. But in order for them to operate next year, we'll have to come up with the full amount next year or whatever is required. But
that would be correct.
We'll be looking for money again next year.
Yes, sir.
My dad used to call that robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Any other questions on revenue before we move into the expense side of the statement? Okay. Item 3 on the budget, and we have about 20 minutes left in this session, so we'll go ahead and kick it off and get started. Before we move to that, I would like to remind the council, if there is a motion to add monies back in to an expense item, you also need to propose an offsetting credit for that. And so there will be you make your motion I want to add this item back, tell what your offsetting credit is. If there's a second, then we'll move on to discussion. If there's no second, then that motion will die. And Mr. Betts, on our iPads, is there FY14 parking lot that we need to click?
There is. Up in the left-hand corner, if you scroll back all the way to the left, up in the left-hand corner, you'll see 3 underscored things: FY14 revenues, FY14 parking lot, and FY14 or revised FY14 parking lot. We'll use the revised FY14 parking lot. That goes more along the lines with the revised agenda that is associated with that. So.
Okay, thank you. Item 3A on the agenda is expanded contingency fund. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nathan originally, I think, had $50,000 in this contingency fund. I know I've talked to several of you over the last couple weeks, and I think maybe some of you may want to have this put into a reserve fund. But as it stands now, it is a contingency fund. I think we need it not only as families, but as businesses and obviously as local government. As we look at, our ending months to this budget we're talking about tonight is literally almost 18 months from tonight. So what we're going to face in the next 18 months, I think it's good to have a contingency plan for. There's things like fuel, obviously different utilities. You could look at the cost of health care and trying to pinpoint exactly what those overall increases are going to be this early in the game is a little bit tough. So I think it's a needed part of this budget.
Thank you, Mayor. The proposed budget, the way it sits right now, the expanded contingency fund would be $72,006. Is that correct, Mr. Betts?
That is correct. I might point out that there's $107 missing from that number, and I won't go into the technical details of it, but just so the council knows, there's a $107 deal that's a little different between Nathan's and the mayor's. And what had happened was one of the things when we were building the staff's budget, we didn't try to say, here's our revenues and now here's our expenses. We went through and said, here's what our expenses are, here's what our revenue projections are, and there was $107 that was off. And initially in Nathan's budget, we put that into to transfer it back to the fund balance. But in this instance, we decided we would just put it all to the reserve when we were talking about the mayor's budget. We just said instead of moving $107, we'd move everything into this contingency fund as opposed to playing with $100 there.
Ms. Nicholas?
I just want to be clear that the number would be in the contingency fund is 72 plus the 50.
That's true. It'd be $122,000.
The 72 is the addition from my budget to the mayor's budget.
That's correct.
So then we're going to balance at the end?
Yeah.
Okay, so that really needs, okay.
Yeah,
So
it
we need to
balances.
Make that adjustment if that's.
Well, you don't want to do that here. I'll explain to you later why.
Okay.
But
Okay, any comments or questions about the expanded contingency fund? And I know that as we go along with our discussion that's subject to change, but at this point, is there any questions or concerns about that line item? Okay, seeing none. Okay, Mr. Prather.
I just need some clarification. Contingency is what it is. Is there a difference between having a line item there and also being able to take it out of our general fund?
Yes. The contingency fund would be money that would be available to use essentially at the city administrator's discretion, as opposed to taking things out of the general fund or the the unencumbered fund balance, which would require council approval.
Mr. Scrivener?
How much is the unencumbered fund balance? What's it set at right now?
I hate to stand up here and give you the wrong. It's $3.5 million. There's some maybe 3.55, but it's in the $3.5 million range.
Okay.
Ms. Carroll?
Thank you. And I just want to clarify, because this is slightly different than item 2, the revenue projections, we went through each one if we needed to make a motion, if we wanted to change. If I understand correctly, going through these items are simply reviewing the changes to the budget, and later we'll come back and have, because some of these items could take really the rest of the meeting, but by saying there's no more questions or comments on a contingency fund doesn't mean that maybe one of us may not come back and tweak that or change it, correct?
You are correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Let's move on to item B, defunding JCTV. Mayor.
I think obviously we've read the news. We've talked about this. This has been something that I've struggled with as a mayor. I know there's people here from JCTV and Lincoln tonight, and I appreciate what they've tried to do over the last year as far as fundraising. But unfortunately, when I look at JCTV as an essential service compared to fire and police and other things that we have on our agenda tonight, I just don't think it's local governments. I just don't see it as an essential service anymore, and that's why I'm cutting it.
Thank you, Mayor. Questions, comments? Mr. Scrivener?
I know one of the written questions was the process of notification and actually winding down our funding of JCTV. And what are we, 5 months to the end of 2013 now? Is it 5 months or 4 months? I've lost track.
Fiscal year you're
Of
talking
our
about?
fiscal year.
4 months.
4 months.
4
People
months?
who are good at
Okay.
missing.
Well, the reason I ask is if this council should decide it, I mean, I don't know how much longer we're going to work on the budget. It may be a couple of meetings, it may be several weeks, but I anticipate that it's not going to take a lot of time because there's not a lot to talk about. There's not a lot of money to put around. But anyway, if we did go through with defunding JCTV, is that something that we would try to provide notice so that there is no obligation for expenditures in 14? Otherwise, you couldn't cut the full 110. You'd have to take into account however many days notice that you had to give.
Mr. Hilbert?
It's 90 days notice, so once the council either voted that way or passed the budget, we'd have to notify JCTV. And I think, didn't you leave in a month or so of funding for JCTV or no?
No, but I do think that's, I mean, it's a bit of a guess when the council would get around to finishing the budget. I don't mean to say it that way, but when the final date would be. If you knew that you were going to wrap up the budget in 30 days and could immediately then pass a resolution authorizing Mr. Hilpert to notify them to terminate the contract, you could get that all done before the end of our fiscal year, that works. But if you can't, then you'll go into the next fiscal year, and so you'll have to figure what 1/12 of, or however many months. It depends on when the city finally decides to send out that notice. If we don't send out the notice until October 31st, then it's a full 90 days before we would see any savings.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, can I make a
Yes,
point,
Mayor.
please? Part of this budget too bill should include money for a part-time camera person for these meetings. So.
Mr. Henry?
And as Kerry mentioned, I'm sure we'll discuss this further, but what I would say is, and I would, to the rest of the council is, we need to, if this gets cut, we need to figure out what else we're prepared to do to support Lincoln. Because now it's not only JCTV, but this becomes bigger than JCTV. We need to figure out another way or other ways that we can support Lincoln.
Thank you. Mr. Mihalovich?
I was reading my budget notes and from recent, I thought, and actually it ended up they were my budget notes from last year, and it's the same story this year. So I got confused, but we're bringing up the same topic, and we ought to do something to resolve this. I think the public's getting information from these proceedings. The part of the PEG, public education, and G, we're the G part of that. So I think it's real important that the public have access to us, that they have, they can listen to these proceedings. So I'm in favor of continuing a good service. If we're doing that streaming and we're taking care of that, I think that's great. However, say for instance, the discussion was to have other meetings online. I would consider paying as you go. Not a total elimination, but paying studio time, paying an hourly rate, paying for some element to ensure that the mayor's concerns that the public gets what they want and they are paying for, but at the same time, we get the access that we want. So I don't have a figure, but I would say if we had an hourly rate and we had some program we would like to sponsor, then we would sponsor it. The other option is we would be willing to sponsor if there's a 50% match to a show. Maybe there's a public interest show that we could put on for the G government that would entitle that would be interest to the public. But I just think right now that the mayor's concern is valid, but I would still like to see this do something to support the G and the PEG.
Mr. Hussey?
I have a question related to that, and I think the mayor touched on it with the hiring of a part-time camera person, but I think we do have an obligation to provide our meetings available to the public, whether that be online. And I guess the question is for Mr. Betts. It's 5,000 further down in here. That's probably some salary to pay that person. Are there additional resources that are going to be needed to infrastructure-wise to make that available? If you pull the 110, through that we also get some other, the product gets out there. If we have to put our product out there on our own, is there a hidden cost that we're not really anticipating to make sure all these meetings are publicly available on the internet?
Yeah, and from my standpoint, I don't believe so. I believe we have the infrastructure in place to be able to stream those and use the equipment. The 5,000 is to hire a camera person, once every 2 weeks. We kind of came up with a budget number, figuring 4 hours a night, and I believe we used $25 an hour for our fee for that person. It might have been 20. It was $20 or $25 an hour. So will we be able to do the other type of shows that JCTV does today in that money? I don't believe so. I believe that will strictly be for council meetings and only council meetings.
Mrs. Carroll?
And this might be a small adjustment, but you said twice a month. But now, is this meeting tonight? I don't even know. Is this being televised on JCTV? So the budget meetings are. So that's in addition to the two.
Correct.
So that is not included in your 5,000.
Right, and this is the first time we've done that. But you're right. We figured the just a regular council meeting.
Just regular, and planning and zoning, I believe, is televised currently as well. So that's not
You're correct.
included in the
That is not.
5,000. Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Graham?
Yes, other than the city council meetings, and are there other programs that JCTV film as relates to the city of Jefferson? So they do like other things other than just these city council meetings?
Mr. Hilbert?
I know that they do the Historic Preservation Awards. Janice could remember the actual name of it. And, of course, they do special meetings when we ask them to. And they have, there's been one or two other events that they have filmed. I know they do the, it's not here, but Bill's ice show as well. So there are several other city events that they film on a yearly, regular basis, recurring basis.
Mr. Scribner?
I guess I would be curious. I'm a little surprised because last year when we were having this discussion, and not that I'm inviting a ton of new emails and phone calls and what have you, but I did get some emails last year about this, and mostly from people that supported. I don't think I got any that opposed. I haven't gotten one this year. I haven't had one email or one phone call, and this issue's been in the newspaper. It's been, it's been public that the mayor had proposed cutting this, and yet I've had no communication. I'd be curious if any other council people have.
Certainly, I've had calls and emails as relates to support. I have had a couple of emails that says to defund. So I had both, but more to support than to defund.
Yeah, I mean, last year I did. I got, I don't know how many. It was, I mean, clearly supporters. A couple of people who have programs on the JCTV and employees and others, but I don't recall getting even one this year. I may have gotten one or two, and I'm just forgetting, but I don't recall getting any.
Mr. Henry?
And as I said what I said, I don't want anyone to get it mistaken. I totally understand the mayor's rationale and behind what he felt like he had to do as far as the budget goes. But again, as I say that, if we're not going to, if we're going to defund JCTV, I think we need to get creative and try to figure out some other ways in which we can support Lincoln. We have a university here, and as a city, I feel like it's an obligation for us to support our university. You know, whatever way that may be, if it's JCTV or not, we have an obligation to do that. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Carroll?
That makes me think of a question. I know Nathan asked us to email questions. Instead of emailing, I might, since you brought it up, what part of our budget, if anything, currently goes to Lincoln, and you can email that and see, is it, I don't know, I'm not talking just JCTV, I think that's part of it, but what in the city budget would go for any, is there anything that is, that goes to Lincoln? Thank you.
I will research that. I'm really not sure that I'm aware of anything. I'm kind of looking to Matt. We may have something we do indirectly for them, but.
And maybe they haven't asked for anything, maybe there are no I just didn't know if there's any partnerships that are out there. Thank you.
I can look at that.
Any other discussion? JCTV. I mean, as it sits right now, without a motion to change it, we are tentatively going to show that in the proposed column that JCTV is defunded. Okay? All right. I have 5 minutes till 7. I think this is a good stopping point for tonight's discussion, unless there's objections. If not, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed,
Mr.
nay.
Chairman, when's the next meeting, please?
The next meeting is Thursday, August the 8th at 5:30. And that is according to the budget schedule that was posted. Thursday, August 8th, 5:30 in the council chambers. Thank you. Thank you.